Come on in, everybody. All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome tonight to what is lecture 3 of this course on lost cause politics. You're seeing my screen. There's the title page for this lecture, and I just finished it, actually. It's really one of the more enjoyable things that I have when I go back in and do an updated version of a lecture series. I'm able to connect it to, things right now. And so I just spent several hours this afternoon updating this. So I'm excited. And it's just so interesting how I won't judge to you all, but I need to learn and relearn and rethink and think again and think about things, and how I actually treasure it. It helps me to kind of like understand the world. So here we are, exactly 28 days from election day. The election is occurring all over the United States right now. It's happening. People are voting. About 3 million people in America have now voted. So lots and lots of people are voting out of what will end up being roughly around 150 million, 160 million. So we're off and we've started. And today I want to talk about the third prong here, Jefferson Davis to George Wallace to Donald Trump, and talk about Trump and MAGA Nation, and to understand this moment we're in. We can look back historically and place the Civil War and the Confederacy and Jefferson Davis. We can look back historically and we can place massive resistance to the modern civil rights era and the rise of states' rights as an argument to George Wallace. We now have enough distance into the Donald Trump era of national politics to, I believe, have a pretty good sense of how to place him and to connect these three entities. And that's what this third lecture is about. So glad to have you, and appreciative that you're here and that you're committed to this just and inclusive democracy that we are at Common Power. Oh, let me actually improve my microphone here. There we go. Let's see here. Hang on a second. Stop share. Here we go. Got the new camera on. So Charles Douglas had gotten me a new camera that has this. It just attaches, and it's a little crisper and clearer, and it's not built into the laptop, so it doesn't have any of the food crumbs that I might or might not have put onto the laptop at different points in time. So it's clearer, and it contains a little microphone in it too. So here we go with the new one. So I want to start with the prologue, and the prologue here is 1989, and it's with this man, of course, Donald Trump. And here he is on the cover of Time magazine in 1989, when he was riveting this country and was on his rise as this kind of like dude who could take on all prisoners, and was this wheeler dealer shark and businessman and all of this. And as he was rising in New York on the strength of his father and on the discrimination that the Trumps have long engaged in, Trump was somebody who also had a very fine ear attuned to racial politics and knew how to wield it and use it for his own purposes in his business dealings. And the most infamous moment in time is when he takes out a full page advertisement in all of the daily newspapers in New York in response to a rape and sexual assault that has occurred in Central Park. It's a very horrible one. A woman is attacked by 5 individuals. So goes the narrative. And They are arrested. They're all black and brown, and they're immigrants. Some of them, they're arrested, and Trump seizes on this to make the argument that these individuals should be killed. They should be executed. And he takes out this advertisement, and these five become known as the Central Park Five. And they're going to go to prison. They go to prison for decades. And Trump's seizing of this moment to make his own to elevate and his own visibility for his own political and business and economic and status purposes is naked. It's nakedly apparent with this kind of an advertisement. And you can all find this advertisement. You can Google it and you can say Trump Central Park 5 newspaper ad, and you'll find this. These five will go to jail. They'll be in jail for decades. And then just a few years ago, they were exonerated, all found not guilty when the person who had committed the assault admitted it, confessed. His DNA was found to match the woman who had been assaulted, and the DNA of these five who had never been connected, which had never been connected to this woman. They were let out of prison. One of them today is on this New York City Council in what is an incredible story. And they came, some of them, and spoke at the Democratic National Committee this year to talk about this is the man, this is the opponent that has been there for decades. Trump, because this is a prologue, Trump jumping on a political, civic, racial moment, seizing it, leveraging it, doing everything he can to advance his interests, destroying people's lives, fanning racial division. Never in this advertisement saying that these people, because of their race, are the issue, but nonetheless engaging in what is very clearly a racialized argument. This is Donald Trump. And so when we get to Donald Trump in 2010s, which will be the focus of this lecture, this is the same man. This is who he's been. And he's not the first racial demagogue in our society. Certainly Wallace had a very high profile, and there have been others, David Duke et al. But the reality is that he took it to a new level. So yes, Sam, just a second. My son has come in and he showed me a text message, and that text message said, "I need my money." Okay, so right now, Sam, what'd you do? You took my phone? Just a second, people. You took my phone?
Yeah.
You gonna do it?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't even need to be part of the exchange of money at this point anymore, folks, because of new app technologies. So we're all good. We're back to good here now. So Trump leveraging, dividing, eviscerating, destroying for his own purposes, and playing this ultimate racist contest. All right. That's 1989. Time magazine's got him on the cover, and he's running this advertisement. Okay. Here, let me just look and check on one quick thing. Just want to make sure that, just need to check on one thing here. Yep. Okay. Good. You all set, my friend?
Yep.
Okay.
Go.
Okay. So that's 1989. I start that as a prologue. It tells us something about this current moment that we aren't quite sure about at the time in 1989, but that now we can see in retrospect. And so this lecture is about connecting from the Confederacy through Wallace, George Wallace, to MAGA, to Trump, and to Make America Great Again. All right. And so we're going to have this timeline that's going to bring us right up to 2024. And I love a good timeline in my courses, my lectures, my teaching. I'm going to have three components to this timeline. We're going to have the Confederacy. We're going to have Wallace in the 1960s. And then we're going to have the kind of Make America Great Again era of the 2010s and 2020s. And I'm going to connect these over time. I'm going to start this timeline with Abraham Lincoln's speech in the old state capital, the initial state capital in Springfield, Illinois, where Abraham Lincoln gives a very famous, in the American story, speech called A House Divided. And in this speech, Lincoln says, if we could first know where we are and whither we are tending, we could then better judge what to do and how to do it. We are now far into the 5th year since the policy was initiated with the avowed object and confident promise of putting an end to slavery agitation. He's referring to a specific policy adopted in 1854 that provided the ability for new states and territories to make their own decisions, what was called popular sovereignty about slavery. He's referring to that particular policy. Under the operation of that policy, that agitation about slavery has not only not ceased, but has constantly augmented. In my opinion, it will not cease until a crisis shall have been reached and passed. A house divided against itself cannot stand. And he's quoting a scriptural verse here. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall, but I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other. Either the opponents of slavery will arrest the further spread of it and place it where the public mind shall rest in the belief that it is in the course of ultimate extinction, or its advocates will push it forward till it shall become alike lawful in all the states, old as well as new, north as well as south. Lincoln does not win the Senate contest that he is in 1858. He loses to the man who had put forward this popular sovereignty policy in 1854, Stephen Douglas. Douglas wins re-election that year as senator in Illinois. Lincoln loses, but they then come back and are the two main opponents in 1860 for the presidency. Lincoln for the new Republican Party, Douglas for the Democratic Party. And in that election, Lincoln, of course, wins. And in that moment in time, the positions of Lincoln are seen as too hostile to slavery for South Carolina and ultimately for Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, and they all secede by the end between December and January of that end of 1860 and 1860, beginning of 1861. Lincoln does not get inaugurated until March of 1861, but they are out and they form the Confederacy, and it's where Jefferson Davis takes the oath of office in February of 1861. I've started this series by talking about these kind of 5 attributes of understanding the kind of dimensions of the lost cause. And in the Confederacy, these were how these dimensions played out. What was worthy was slavery. That was the positive good that John Calhoun had called it. The villains were Northerners, especially Lincoln. The victims were these Southern Christian whites. The response by these Southern Christian whites was, we need to restore, and we will restore our white power. And the methods are whatever it took. Violence and disfranchisement, whatever was necessary, whatever was needed, they were going to do it. That's the first. And their response is because they secede, they are beaten, but they will not live in a restored United States of America where African Americans have power that whites in the South will not accept. And so they engage in these dimensions, both in Civil War and then ultimately during what they call white redemption, the redeeming and the restoration of Southern white power. Lincoln's speech and his positions were enough to move these folks to secede from the Union before he even took office. After the war, he's gone, but that commitment to white power restoration and violence and disfranchisement as the methods was holistic. It was total. We'll call this overtly racial because it clearly is. In our analysis of the racism and the way race plays out in our communications and in our behaviors, we'll call this era the overtly racial era. Okay. Along the way, decades after the end of the Civil War and after Reconstruction, because this is a timeline here on its way to 2024, we get to a moment in time where integration is demanded of the American public. Racial integration, the 1948 desegregation of the armed forces, the 1954 Brown v. Board of Education decision, the 1955 Brown 2 decision, which said that the Southern states needed to move forward with all deliberate speed, and ultimately a series of civil rights acts in 1957, 1960, 1964, and 1965 force integration upon American society, American South, but all of American society. And that integration is so cataclysmic, so revolutionary and unacceptable that it produces an updated version, a new version of the Confederacy, but one that needs to be tailored to the new legal and cultural environs in which it's no longer acceptable to be as overtly racist in the same way. It's just it's running in conflict with laws that are being passed and the sensibilities of an evolving world. When John Kennedy gives in a speech in early 1963, I'm sorry, in June, so middle of 1963, and he talks about it's our obligation, it's our responsibility to make this revolution peaceful and constructive. That's pretty dramatic language for an American president, obviously a white man, to be using. So that's not going to happen without a massive response. And that's what the 1950s and 1960s produce, is a massive response, what's called massive resistance to this modern civil rights era. And it comes directly out of Virginia and out of the American South. And George Wallace comes to seize it and to embody this, losing in 1958 the governorship, taking away from it his understanding that he needs to be more racist, more demagogic, more overtly a segregationist, running again on that kind of an updated version, winning election in 1962, giving his inaugural speech in 1963. Wallace understands the currents, sees the moments, understands the political opportunities, and seizes them. He, as far as I know and can tell, was willing and did say whatever was going to be needed to achieve his power aims. He was willing to destroy, willing to rise, willing to do whatever it took to achieve the power that he sought to achieve. There's a great documentary about him that is a 2-hour documentary by PBS that tracks his career, and it tracks a pre-1962 and a post-1962 kind of George Wallace. And Wallace in that inaugural, and I talked about it, yesterday, obviously lays out a new updated version of the notion of the lost cause and this tremendous noble endeavor the American South, the American white South was engaged in. And in his address, he gives these words: "Today I have stood where once Jefferson Davis stood and took an oath to my people. It is very appropriate then that from this cradle of the Confederacy, this very heart of the great Anglo-Saxon Southland, that today we sound the drum for freedom, as have our generations of forebears before us done, time and again down through history. Let us rise to the call of freedom-loving blood that is in us and send our answer to the tyranny that clanks its chains upon the South. In the name of the greatest people that have ever trod this earth, I draw the line in the dust and toss the gauntlet before the feet of tyranny. And I say, segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. As a political, racial, power-based strategy to ensure white supremacy, Wallace perfected it in the 1960s. All right. And his version of the lost cause, updated, said, we're not talking about slavery here now. We're talking about sovereignty of states and citizens. We're going to pick up the notion of sovereignty and the power of states that Jefferson Davis had laid when he didn't want to talk about slavery either. We're going to pick it up and talk about this in sovereignty. This is not about, it's not about white dominance. It's not. It's about sovereignty. It's in opposition to this tyrannical federal government who once took up arms against us in the American South and will do it again if given the chance. What's at stake here? Not overtly the experience of Southern Christian whites, but instead heritage and traditions and ways of life, which in their effect produce white dominance. How are we going to do this? We're going to ensure individual freedoms from government, freedom from the tyranny, freedom from taxation, freedom from everything, freedom from voting control. We're going to do it on our terms, white Alabamians, white Southerners. And how are we going to do this? We're going to be forever resistant to the federal government. We're going to be massive resistors to the federal government. We will fight against a Voting Rights Act. We will fight against a Civil Rights Act. We will fight against interracial marriage. It is the same protective tissue for the white supremacy that the Confederacy sought, but it is an updated narrative. It's a narrative that is so powerful that Wallace begins to capture national attention, as I talked about last time, and forever shapes American public life and politics. He never becomes president, but everybody who becomes president during his lifetime and afterwards is influenced by George Wallace. This is what we'll call facially neutral, covertly racial. On its face, it is not racial. It's about state sovereignty. It's about a tyrannical federal government. It's about the heritage and tradition and the ways of living that these certain peoples have. It's about individual freedoms, and it's about resistance to the federal government. But it is not about racial dominance. They've removed that, even though that's the effect. And that facially neutral, covertly racial dimension has defined this country since Wallace put it forward as a winning political strategy. It has defined American politics for decades. Okay. So today then, we pick up the story and we go to the 2007 Barack Obama presidential launch. And Barack Obama doesn't just run for the presidency. An African-American man, Barack Obama, launches his presidential campaign outside the state capitol in Illinois that Abraham Lincoln had spoken at in 1858. Obama symbolically connects himself to Lincoln as a Black man and gives his speech there and launches his campaign. And over on the right side, in that crowd of a couple thousand, on this February morning of 2007, when it was 0 degrees, like it had been 0 in Alabama on Wallace's inaugural, in that crowd, I'm there. I'm there because I felt that this might be a moment in American life. The same way I felt that about when Kamala Harris announced her candidacy in 2019. And Charles Douglas and I went to see her announce the candidacy in Oakland. There's just these moments when you feel that this might be something. This might be a defining moment. Obama does this, and he symbolically, intentionally, overtly, viscerally connects himself to Abraham Lincoln. And that, folks, is the equivalent of George Wallace throwing down the gauntlet. It is Barack Obama throwing down the gauntlet to a new America. And I, of course, embrace this America. I wholeheartedly endorse it and seek to live in it. It has defined me and my entire adult life. Committed to this work, aligning with the viewpoints of a diverse and just and fair America. And so I treasure it. But if you were opposed to it, and if you don't want it, then you feel as viscerally offended and concerned and angry about it as I feel about what George Wallace did and what the Confederacy did. And so Obama is the Lincoln moment, and it's not subtle. It is not subtle for those that are attuned to losing power and fear of this and have racial lineages in their understandings of the world. So Obama wins. He wins in 2008. And what happens when he wins in 2008 on this timeline is suddenly there's a black man in the White House. There's a black family in the White House. There's an African-American attorney general, Eric Holder. There's people gaining power in this country who have never had this kind of power. And so integration was a cataclysmic adjustment and change in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. The power ushered in by President Barack Obama was a cataclysmic moment in this country. Okay, absolutely. Wesley Morris, who is a cultural critic, or critic's not the right word, cultural analyst for the New York Times, wrote this in 2015 when the Obama presidency was coming to a close. He wrote this about Barack Obama. Barack Obama's election was the dynamite that broke open the country. It was a moment. It was the moment. Obama was biological proof of some kind of progress, the product of an interracial relationship, the kind that was outlawed in some states as recently as 1967, but was normalized now. What if suddenly anything was possible? What if we could be and we could do whatever and whoever we wanted? In that moment, the country was changing. We were changing. Obama was black. He was white. He was hope. He was apocalypse. We had never really had a white president until we had a black one. And people attuned to the effects of cataclysmic racial progress and change knew that with the election of Barack Obama and the ascendancy of genuine power out of the hands of white Americans, while this is seen as a great, great, great thing for many of us, it was seen as the apocalypse by others. And there was clearly going to be a price for this. In the same way there was massive resistance in the rise of George Wallace and the murder of Emmett Till in 1955, sure, there was going to be a price for Barack Obama's ascendancy. And it was gonna come. It was going to come. And so it came, and it came quickly. And we saw the beginnings of it in the 2009 and 10 Obamacare debate. The damn thing was named after him, Obamacare, symbolically listing it with even more freightage and significance. And in this debate, I want us for a couple minutes here to remember and to channel the arguments against the Obamacare policy. What were the arguments against the Affordable Care Act? The Affordable Care Act is a revolutionary policy. It really is the equivalent of a Civil Rights Act in that it extended health care to millions and millions of Americans that have been excluded financially or systemically, and would eventually get healthcare and have gotten healthcare now. Certainly poor whites are in this bad shit of people, but it particularly heavily provided care for lower income African Americans and Latinos, or people on their way up the economic ladder. So what are the arguments against Obamacare? And do they ring congruent with the arguments that Wallace put forward in 1963 when he was arguing for a shift away from this journey towards racial equality? That was not overtly what he was doing, but that's what he was doing. So in this case, the debate is about a healthcare policy. So it's not overtly about race. It's facially not about race, but it picks up the same themes. So let's take a look at them. What's worthy? If you're arguing against the Affordable Care Act, if we're arguing against it, what's worthy here? The sovereignty of states and citizens to be able to make their own decisions about healthcare. In fact, to get Obamacare, Affordable Care passed, ultimately the federal government and the Democratic leadership in the Congress have to strike a deal that allows state governors to reject the Obamacare policies. And more than 20 states do initially. The argument is that states must be sovereign to make their own decisions for their citizens. Okay, well, that's straight out of the kind of argument of states' rights, which builds upon the lost noble cause argument. So what's going to be lost here if we pass Obamacare? Sovereignty of states. And when we lose sovereignty of states, we lose something noble, according to this argument. Who are the villains? Well, it's the tyrannical federal government again, forcing these states to adopt a policy. And in fact, the fight against the so-called tyrannical federal government goes on today. The argument that Affordable Care Act must be gutted came within a single vote in the 2017 or no, 18 or 17, don't know when it was, that Collins, Murkowski, and McCain voted against it to kill the bill in the Senate. But still, Donald Trump says, we got to get rid of it. And MAGA says, I want to get rid of it, even though that Healthcare Act is helping them because they don't want the tyrannical federal government. Who are the victims? According to this argument, this anti-Obamacare argument, the victims are the traditions of people choosing their own doctors, their ways of life of having control over their medical decisions, their ability, they say, to be able to control their lives, to decide when they want care, to do it on their terms. The argument is made that there will be death panels that will decide and override the decisions. And the response is, we can't have that. We need to protect our individual freedoms. We need to be able to protect our individual ability to make our own choices, not about abortion here, folks, but about the health care of people. We need to be able to present our own decisions. States need to be sovereign to allow citizens to make their own decisions about their traditions and ways of deciding about health. And what are the methods that are necessary in order to achieve this, to stop the Obamacare policy? Well, then we need to be forever resistance to federal government. If we can't stop the federal bill, at least we can do it at the states level. And so secession in the 1860s is matched by an absolute unwillingness in the current moment of states to adopt the Obamacare Affordable Care Act policies. They can resist it, they can reject it, they can secede from the policy. Very rarely do we see this in any policies in the American electorate. This is an instance of where it plays out. And it is the signature defining policy of the first African-American man to gain the presidency. All right. So this line of rhetoric, this opposition to the Affordable Care Act, is so fundamentally aligned with the rhetoric of George Wallace that we know that if George Wallace and the states' rights rhetoric of the 1960s obscured, shrouded, but deeply upheld the last three components of the Confederacy worldview, the Southern Christian whites and the white power restoration and the usage of violence and disfranchisement to restore that and hold that power. We know too that this worldview, this narrative against Obamacare does the same. It upholds and protects not only heritage, tradition, ways of life, and individual freedoms, through forever resistance to federal government, it upholds the power of Southern Christian whites and restores their power and allows them to use whatever means are necessary. This through line of communications from the Confederacy to this adoption and updating by the Wallace et al.'s, and then really adopted and brought back into the space whole cloth in the opposition to Obamacare, is a through line that someone like myself studies in communications. The same arguments are being used to achieve similar outcomes. So we can say that the Obamacare, and we should say that the Obamacare argument is exactly what the states' rights argument were in the 1950s and 60s. It's still facially neutral, covertly racial. On its face, it is facially neutral. It's not about race, but in its effects, in its outcomes, it's racial. All right. That's what was going on those years. And that's the environment in which the Tea Party emerges and cloaks itself in the revolutionary ideals of the American Revolution by calling itself the Tea Party, this restoration of white power. And they are so active and engaged. And those of us that got Obama elected were so tired and were not as engaged as we now are. And we had this massive response, massive resistance again. And the Tea Party and conservatives win more seats in the US House than any swing election has ever had in the United States, and take control of the House of Representatives. They get several seats in the Senate. Eventually, they'll get the Senate in 2014, but they begin to restore and take over power. This is the kind of thing that if George Wallace was sitting on the sidelines watching, if he was alive still, this political dynamics, these political dynamics of a covertly, facially neutral, covertly racial set of politics with a black man in the White House is the kind of thing that George Wallace would have called over a protege or two and would say, you see what's going on here? Let me tell you what's going on here. And he would have put his arm around him and he would have said, here, my fellow protege, here's how you capitalize and use this to your advantage. I've been there. I've done it. You can do it too. And that's when we get the entrance of a new George Wallace. A new George Wallace, who has been doing this kind of thing since the 1980s and understands it and seizes it and sees it, can see it, sees it, and then seizes it. And that's the genesis of the Donald Trump MAGA world. The Donald Trump, George Wallace of our era enters stage left. So let's adapt our timeline now and focus on this era from Obama's presidency through 2024. And we have the Obamacare debate in 2009 and 2010. And then we have these elections of 2010 in which Republicans gain power. And there is this person who has been a variety of things politically, but understands how to achieve power, understands what to do, how to maneuver it, to leverage it. Give him a chance to run against a woman, even better. Here comes Donald Trump. And this is a quote from Ulysses Grant. He gave this quote in 1875 when he was wrapping up his presidency. And this is General Michael Hayden, a Democratic, big D Democratic supporting military leader. This is Grant's words. If we are to have another contest in the near future of our national existence, I predict that the dividing line will not be Mason and Dixon's, but between patriotism and intelligence on the one side, and superstition, ambition, and ignorance on the other. Now, Grant had seen it he had seen the response, the redemption and the fight and the rise of the Klan. He was a learned individual. And so it's time to start to utilize the tools. And Trump starts to see a tool, and it's Obama's birtherism. We're going to question Barack Obama's citizenship. And he's not been involved in politics at all. He's given money. In fact, he donated to Democrats. He's pals with the Clintons and so on and so on. But he's intrigued, just like a George Wallace would be intrigued. Like, how I think I can do this. I think I can maneuver this. I think that I can use this to advantage. And so he goes to the the Conservative Political Action Committee and gives a speech there in 2011. And this is where they allow everybody to come and speak to them and rah them and get them all excited. And this is, just a few months after the grand 2010 elections, when conservatives have won all of these seats and flipped the House of Representatives and has won all these governor seats across the country and several U.S. Senate seats. And Trump goes to CPAC, and it's his political entrance. It's his entree into the political space. And like any good demagogue, he's going to try out some lines. He's going to try out some messages. He's going to try out and see how it works. And he offers this argument about Obama not being an American citizen. Where'd this guy come from? No one's ever seen him. We got to get some proof that he's an American citizen, all of which is not on its face racial. It's an argument about citizenship. But it's clearly racial because it's about a black man in the White House, the first one to occupy the presidency. And so at CPAC, at the Conservative Political Action Committee, Trump says, our current president came out of nowhere. The people who went to school with him, they don't even know him. They never saw him. They don't even know who he is. It's crazy. Folks, this is insane. This is such an outrageous lie. And we, as a society, did not obliterate it. We did not attack it and force it to stand down. We did not. We were not aware. We had not learned our lessons adequately of how you beat a demagogue. You have to attack and respond. You have to call it out. This is what Vice President, someday soon going to be Madam President, Kamala Harris understands. You have to go right at it, but we didn't. And so Trump makes this claim and he gets this standing ovation at CPAC because these folks are looking for some way to marginalize and demonize Barack Obama. Shortly after this argument, and they do it after Trump makes this big splash at CPAC, Politico runs a poll and finds that half of people who say they're going to vote in the Republican primary in 2012 think that Barack Obama was not born in the United States. Just an outrageous lie. It's a narrative that is facially neutral and covertly racial. All right. And so Trump goes on The View in 2011, a month after CPAC, just like Vice President Harris went on The View yesterday to reach certain demographics, women and, non-overtly political women in particular. The most highest rated morning show then and now. 3 of the hosts are still there for yesterday's Kamala Harris visit. And on that View, Donald Trump has what I call his George Wallace moment, in which he gives his dramatic statement that parallels Wallace's segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever in terms of drama. It is a dramatic thing, and he's trying it out, and he's doing it on national television, and he's going to go all in and see how it responds. So let's take a look, because we need to, at this clip by Donald Trump. Okay, yeah. So he's on The View for, the clip itself is 15 minutes long. We're going to watch about a 4-minute portion right in the middle.
Says that maybe that's why I'm sitting here, partially because people have gotten to know me.
But what about this? You recently said about President Obama, I'm going to quote you, he grew up and nobody knew him. Nobody knows who he is until later in his life. The whole thing is very strange. What are you driving at there? Are you a birther, well, Donald?
Okay. Let me just tell you, I was a really good student at the best school. I'm not like a smart guy, okay? They make these birthers into the worst idiots. Why doesn't he show his birth certificate? I think he probably because I have to and everybody else has to.
I'm sure.
Why wouldn't he show? Excuse me. Why? No, excuse me. I really believe there's a birth certificate. Why? Look, she's smiling. Why doesn't he show his birth certificate? And you know what? I wish he would, because I think it's a terrible pall that's hanging over him. He should show his birth certificate. The other thing, if you go back to my first grade, my kindergarten, people remember me. Nobody from those early years.
That's not true. We have pictures of them. What are you talking about?
Okay, show me a picture.
There are kids in Hawaii. There are people in Hawaii. There are people that he's grown up. No, as little kids.
I haven't seen early pictures. But more importantly, why doesn't he? And you know what? I think he probably was, but the word probably would be.
Why should he have to defend himself against?
You know why?
Against an accusation.
Because if you're going to be the president, because if you're going to be the president of the United States, it says very profoundly that you have to be born in this country.
But did any other president be the president.
Everybody.
Did George Bush show be the president?
You know what I said? Probably he
Because
was.
no one has ever asked George Bush or said to George Bush, I'm sorry, is Hawaii not part of the United States?
George Bush. And I'm not saying I was a fan of George Bush.
No.
You know that better than anybody. But George Bush was born in this country. That's right.
Isn't Hawaii still part of the United States?
Question?
Am I gone?
You know
question
what?
whether he was or not because he hasn't come forward with it?
I grew up in New York. Wall Street was a big part. I have seen fraud, and I have seen scandal, and I have seen things that a lot of people don't see. I've seen people take a $100 bill and make it $1 million bill.
We're going to have to pause. Get to the point.
Okay, the point is, I can't rely on some newspaper that they show
In
that...
order to become president of the United States, in order to
I
get
want
a
him to
driver's
show his
license, in
birth
order to-
certificate. I want him to show his birth certificate. There's something on
Okay,
that
why
birth
not, I guess.
certificate that he doesn't like.
Oh, my
Oh,
God.
that's a terrible
That is
thing to
just
say.
the
Whoopi, I'm
worst
telling
thing.
you.
He was 3 pounds a
Whoopi,
day.
I love you. I'm
Donald,
telling
I love
you.
you, too. I think that's the biggest pile of dog mess I've heard in ages.
But the question is, then why not show it, right?
There's something on his birth certificate he doesn't want to.
So what he does in that moment is blow up The View, and they're arguing. They're all talking. He's dominating. He gets his points through. He tells them, interrupts them, does all of that. Their responses are to him, but they are not nearly equivalent to the response that would need to be had, that would need to have been occurred, which is to throw him the fuck off of the stage. Okay? But they don't do that. And that's the environment in which he launches his political career. He's like, I got this. I can ride this. I can take this somewhere. I can go and utilize this for political purposes. And that's what a George Wallace recognizes. Just as sure as George Wallace understood that he could ride his arguments into national political prominence out of Alabama, Donald Trump from New York City, having done similar things in the the so-called greatest city in the world, understands now that he's got a message. Okay? And he just follows it. When he comes down that escalator in 2015, he decides to attack Mexican immigrants as criminals and the worst, and drug dealers and rapists. He attacks Muslims and enacts a Muslim ban. In the same way that Wallace would attack immigrants and lazy people for not living up to the ideals that he had set forward. He talks about crooked Hillary in the same way that George Wallace would talk about the corrupt elites and the pointy-headed intellectuals and how they don't care. In fact, they're making fun of the little people. And just like Wallace seized the mantle of victimization, why are you coming after me? Just like the American Confederacy, the Southern Confederacy said, why are you big, bad Northern people coming after us and aggressing against us? He seized the moral high ground of, you're coming after me like a witch hunt. This notion of the bad, tyrannical people are coming after good old American Donald. It's a beautiful argument. It's a horrible argument. It's an effective argument. And it's one when the electorate is not as sufficiently vigilant. And does not sufficiently seize energy to respond to it. It can win. It can capitalize. And it does. And he wins, of course, in 2016. He wins in 2016. And he gains the presidency. And he runs through with these same kind of arguments and he tries to adapt them to Joe Biden. But as he gets close to Joe Biden, he starts to prepare the country for the loss. And he starts to adopt the language of somebody's going to steal this. They're going to take it. They are going to cheat us out of it. Just like the Confederacy was cheated out of its power and its nobility under the lost cause argument. They didn't lose, they were cheated in the lost cause. And so too, George Wallace did not lose. He was shot and cheated. Donald Trump says, they're going to cheat me. They're going to steal it from not only me, but from those of you that agree with me. And he goes around, and this is so much familiar to us at this point in time. His language about elections being rigged and cheating and stolen. And the guy is relentless, and he never stops on this because he understands the resonance of a lost cause. He understands what it means to argue that your cause is noble and to say that it was stolen, that it was cheated, it was ripped away unfairly. There is a moral power in this that the lost cause folks in the 1860s, 70s, and 80s understood, that George Wallace et al. Understood in the 1960s, and that Donald Trump has understood and effectively mobilized for years now. This is a great little figure by the Washington Post, where it takes, on the far left side is a column, and those are months, January to January. And it's January 2020 to January 2021. And from left to right are days in each month. And what they did in this analysis, they looked at election-related terms by Trump in his Twitter, in his tweets. And they only looked at 4 words. They looked at, for 4 words, rigged, mail, fraud, and ballot. They looked at these in the presence of Donald Trump's Twitter feed across these many months. They looked on a daily basis to see if they were present in the Washington Post analysis. And this is what they identified across this year, from the beginning of 2020 through 2020 as the election year went on. And there's, an obvious increase over time. And as you get close to the election, it's virtually omnipresent from the middle of September forward. All right? Because he's not going to be beaten fairly and squarely, just like the South was not going to accept having been beaten fairly and squarely. The argument was going to be that it was rigged, it was stolen, they were cheated. In the words of Jefferson Davis, they were not conquered, they were cheated. Trump loses in early November. That night in early November, I remember this as clear as a bell. Charles Douglas and I were on our Zoom call with everybody during COVID, watching, monitoring, examining everything all night long at about 2 a.m. Pacific time, 4 a.m. Central time. We watched the Wisconsin returns out of Milwaukee get counted, and Joe Biden gained the lead and eventually the victory in Wisconsin. That night at about 12:30 Eastern time, Donald Trump came out and argued and claimed that he had won. He said, this is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country. We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election. We did win this election. So our goal now is to ensure the integrity for the good of this nation. This is a very big moment. This is a major fraud in our nation. We want the law to be used in a proper manner. So we'll be going to the U.S. Supreme Court. We want all voting to stop. All voting had stopped at that time. What hadn't finished was, of course, vote counting. He goes on, we don't want them to find any ballots at 4 o'clock in the morning and add them to the list, okay? It's a very sad moment. To me, this is a very sad moment, and we will win this. And as far as I'm concerned, we already have won it. We know that this was a calculated political strategy to claim victory so that he could invoke this as the moral high ground and that someone was trying to steal it, to take it away from him, even though we know, and the truth of it is that all that was happening was ballots were being counted, often in states where Republican legislatures would not allow them to count those ballots beforehand. And in the days after the election, and we're going to go back to that Washington Post graphic there, and we're going to pick up his Twitter feed. In the days following the election, this is the amount of discussion that Trump has in his Twitter feed about fraud and about rigged, till he's eventually thrown off of Twitter on January 5th, 2025, when he's excluded from Twitter and not allowed back until about 6 months ago by Elon Musk. And his argument is amplified by the new Daughters of the Confederacy. It's not the Daughters of the Confederacy. It's their version today of, it's Fox News. Fox News, Newsmax. What's the other one? Like America Nation or America News or something. They all took his arguments. They found other people, Giuliani et al., that amplified it over and over and over again. And just like there were associations built in the aftermath of the Civil War to build a narrative about the lost cause and to promulgate it, well, we don't have that pacing anymore. We have a much more shortened pacing in our communications approach. And so this happens on a day, it happened on an overnight, daily, immediate basis across news outlets, with Fox trumpeting and leading the way. And it's going to ultimately end up costing Fox News, millions upon millions of dollars for their libelous claims. The lost cause kicked in long before the election for Donald Trump. He laid the groundwork, knowing what it looks like, having watched Wallace, and before Wallace, having watched the Confederacy, to understand how it is that when you control a narrative and you construct your cause as noble and right, and that you argue that someone stole it and cheated you, that you gain the moral high ground if you can connect your cause and place it in the larger American white discourse. And that produces these kinds of activities on January 6th. In fact, there's a direct through line. This is the lost cause today. It is the battle flag of the Confederacy now in the service of George Wallace becoming Donald Trump. Okay, so I want to begin to wrap up and bring it to a complete kind of climactic close here, this series. And what I want to do is connect the narratives across time to show how it is that the MAGA nation builds upon the Wallace states' rights arguments, and they build upon the Confederate lost cause, all right? All of which gains traction and eventually crystallization and cementing because of the alignment with the Christianity set of teachings. And I've gone through this already for the first two columns for the kind of categories of who's the savior, what's the climactic battle, who's the betrayer, who are the violent true believers, who are the iconic sheroes, what's the resurrection, what's the holy text. And so I'm just going to quick flip through this for the first two columns. The saviors are Jesus and Robert E. Lee. The climactic battle is Armageddon and Gettysburg. The betrayer is Judas or General Longstreet. The violent true believers are the Crusaders and the Klan. The iconic sheroes are Mary and Magdalene, Mary, Mother of Jesus, and Mary Magdalene, or the United Daughters of the Confederacy. The resurrection is Jesus or the South rising again. And the holy text in both cases is the Christian Bible. Well, the MAGA lost cause argument under Trump's leadership fundamentally aligns with all of this. It's either the greatest, luckiest rhetorical alignment in the history of terrible rhetorical arguments. Or it's one that at a gut level, Donald Trump and MAGA Nation understood in the same way that George Wallace understood it and adapted his career trajectory at a gut level. Who's the savior in the MAGA lost cause? Who's the savior? This is the easiest category on the board to kind of think about Jeopardy language. Who's the savior in the MAGA lost cause? Well, of course, it's Donald J. Trump. Of course it is. Even more perfectly, he's got the middle initial J, because you got to have a middle initial if you're going to be like a modern savior. So you got Robert E. Lee, you got George Wallace, and I guess there's no middle initial with Wallace, but Robert E. Lee, Donald J. Trump beautifully flows. What's the climactic battle in MAGA lost cause? Well, it's clearly January 6, 2021. That's the climactic Armageddon moment. That's the moment they marched. They marched as sure as George Pickett and Robert Lee marched across the Gettysburg prairie. They marched from the mall to the to the U.S. Capitol. So the climactic battle is January 6, 2021. Although I would add this, it's the climactic battle so far. So far. Because Trump is positioning us for a bigger one still. And this is just one of countless numbers of public statements that he said, positioning us for this climactic battle that's coming. In which on his Truth Social, which is like his version of Twitter, he says, 2024 is our final battle. With you at my side, we will demolish the deep state. We will expel the warmongers from our government. We will drive out the globalists. We will cast out the communists, the Marxists, and fascists. We will throw off the sick political class that hates our country. We will rout the fake news media. We will evict Joe Biden. This is back when Biden was running for president, from the White House. And we will finish the job once and for all. This is not the language of Jefferson Davis. It's an updated version of Jefferson Davis. It's the Jefferson Davis language of 1861, updated. We will do all that we need to do because we are in the right. Who's the betrayer? This is the second easiest category on the board, folks. Who's the betrayer in the MAGA lost cause? I'm going to wait here till you put your guesses in the chat. Who's the betrayer? Go ahead, put your guesses in the chat. Of course, it's Pence. Cheney, I think somebody added Cheney, Liz Cheney. Sure, she's terrible too, but she's not the ultimate Judas in the MAGA lost cause Christianity narrative. Pence is. Just, was it today or yesterday? Trump talking about Pence again, that Pence just didn't have the courage, the moral courage, the fortitude to do the right thing. How would you like, I have no political sympathies for Mike Pence. None. That dude stands for virtually everything I don't. But on a human level, I think about you're vice president of the United States and you have lived your life as you understand it, seeking to uphold the ideals of this country. And then you stick to it and do it under the pressure from the man who's president. And the dude wants you killed and destroys your life. So he's the betrayer. Even he clearly still is the Judas in this story. Who are the violent true believers? They're the Proud Boys to stand back and stand ready. Okay, stand by and stand ready, folks. They're the ones that led the violence on the Capitol on January 6, 2021. Are they the Klan? They are the modern version of the Klan. Yes, that's who they are. They are the same people today. Who are the iconic sheroes in this story? Well, they're the Marjorie Taylor Greene and the Kari Lakes and the Lauren Boeberts. All of them, these sycophantic white women, they're all white women who stand up for their beloved hero, Donald Trump, and make claim after claim after claim that is false in behalf of their hero. You know, people right now are getting E. coli in regions of the West because they're drinking non-pasteurized milk, because Marjorie Taylor Greene has said that the milk, pasteurized milk, is a plot by the globalists to vaccinate everybody against people's wishes. Kari Lake is just a joke, a buffoon, who has been arguing that she is actually the governor of Arizona and is now the Senate candidate in Arizona, but will nonetheless swear obedience to Donald Trump. And Lauren Boebert, same ilk. These white women who have outsized importance in the American political environment, even though they are truly, truly ancillary players. What's the resurrection? Well, if Jesus is going to rise again and the South is going to rise again, who's going to rise again in the MAGA lost cause? Who's going to rise again? Well, of course, it's going to be Trump. It's going to be Donald Trump. He's going to win again. And so if you believe this, if you buy it, if you're so down the rabbit hole that you're thinking that this Hurricane Milton is engineered by these liberals, then you look at the resurrection of Donald Trump politically, and you are invested. It is core in the same way that for the Crusaders, this idea was core. In the same way that for the white redeemers of the American South, it was core. In the same way as it was for those who fought against integration in the American South. You will believe it. You will fight for it until your last breath. And what's the holy text? What's the holy text? Well, of course, it's the Bible. It's Donald Trump's favorite book. It's his favorite book. It's such a favorite book for him that he's actually created his own version. He's created the own MAGA lost cause Bible. I mean, this is an innovation that George Wallace et al. Did not come up with. This is a beyond anything you could have imagined innovation that George Wallace, if he was sitting on the sidelines, would have to say, well done. Well done. That's impressive. Very impressive. In this Bible that we now know was manufactured in China, there is the American Declaration of Independence and the Constitution in this Bible as part of the text. In addition to, I guess, the rest of the traditional Christian Bible. And it's the Trump Bible. And, you know, it's not a focus of this lecture, but in the state of Oklahoma, just as a little side note story, in the state of Oklahoma, Ryan Walters, who's the Secretary of Education, the Superintendent of Education, has the state legislature has passed a law saying that the Bible must be read in school. Yes, that is what the state legislature has passed a law. The Bible must be read in school. This will be going to the Supreme Court eventually, but this is the law right now. And who knows, the Supreme Court probably is going to uphold it. But Ryan Walters, the Superintendent of Education, has set the criteria for which Bible can be read in school, that it has to meet certain criteria, because there's lots of different versions of this book. So which version, what criteria are necessary? And my God, believe it or not, the criteria that he's identified are exactly the criteria that this Bible, the Trump Bible, meets. It has you have to have the Declaration of Independence. You have to have the Constitution in it. It has to be leather bound. Okay, it meets. It is the criteria that Walters has set forward is met by only one Bible copy in the world, and it's the Trump Bible. So they are going to be buying the Trump Bible. This is the lost cause, folks. This is the equivalent of building the institutions and the markers and the monuments and the textbooks. So I'm going to close here. Just as a few examples, as a few indicators of Donald Trump as the savior. These are just a few indicators of kind of MAGA nation's beliefs. Here's a billboard. Unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders. About Donald Trump. This is a car. I think this was in Iowa in May. Trump, the man who left his great life to be defamed, mocked, ridiculed, and humiliated to serve and protect America. Donald is mine, chosen, divine. Stand with him before man, and I will stand with you before my Father in heaven. This is some of the iconography. There are these paintings that put Trump in all of these moments in time, and they're often linked. They often show Trump and Jesus together. These patriots talking about it. This is at the end of 2023, talking about the new Civil War. And here's the new Robert E. Lee's ready to go into battle. Here's an interview in Iowa in early January where this woman says, well, when Trump says I'm being indicted for you, her thoughts go to, my first thought went to, well, Jesus Christ died for my sins. Jesus died for me. In her mind, it connects in her brain that way. Okay, he's doing this for us. And evangelical voters who make up 60% of the electorate in the Iowa caucuses gave, over 90% of their votes to Donald Trump. This is a video, God Gave Us Trump, that was produced in January. You can Google it and search it, God Gave Us Trump, and it's a riff on like the 6 days of creation. And on the 7th day, God gave us Trump. Okay. And now, just to bring it up to this exact moment, there are countless stories and positions and people saying that Trump dodging the bullet or surviving the assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania, is because God spared Trump. Because God is the chosen one. I'm sorry, because Trump is the chosen one. In the lost cause mythology, to have an assassination attempt and to not be killed, man, that's gold. That's gold. That is divine evidence of your special chosenness. So Trump being narrowly not dying in this assassination attempt further solidifies Trump as the savior who will rise again, that his cause, the MAGA cause, was ripped away from them by these corrupt Democrats and political leaders in this country. And they are going to rise again, and this is their moment right now. Okay. So from the Confederacy to MAGA, the through lines are that the goals are white power, the goals are whatever means necessary, And the application of achieving it is to adopt a set of rhetorical arguments that create a narrative which allow you to apply a facially neutral argument to a racial outcome. George Wallace perfected this in the 1960s and turned it into a national endeavor that led to 45 years of Southern presidents. Barack Obama blew it up in American politics in the same way that the Brown v. Board of Education blew up American life in the 1950s and made the way after Obama's election for Donald Trump to seize the day and the political advantage like George Wallace did. And he has. And he's rode the facially neutral arguments about birther, about Obama's citizenship, and about bad immigrants coming to America to run and win the presidency, and then when he was defeated, to turn it into a lost cause. So right now we live in the middle of the lost cause moment of this time. And they did not beat it when the lost cause ideas were created in the 1860s, 70s, 80s, 90s. They did not. American whites, Northern whites, actually accepted it, adopted it, sought to have commonality and common ground, all to move America forward in the interests of peace. It is our moment to beat it. We have to beat it now. We have to defeat Trump, and we have to rise up truth and the belief in our democratic elections. We have to kill the lost cause of Trump today. That is the stakes. These are the stakes that are here. So I want to finish with a quote and then a couple tweets. I want to finish a quote with about the book that I've referenced, Jefferson Cowie's book, Freedom's Dominions. And it brings us right to this moment in time. That morning on January 6th in 2021, spurring them on was Congressman Mo Brooks, who represented the northern part of, I typed this in, I should get who represented the northern part of Alabama in its 5th congressional district. Brooks, secretly wearing body armor for the battle to come, delivered an incendiary speech to the throngs of protesters swathed in camo and combat garb at the Save America rally, as it was called. His graceless political rhetoric made the words of 1960s George Wallace seem like the erudition of Cicero. Today is the day, Brooks proclaimed, American patriots start taking down names and kicking ass. He sought the overthrow of a fair and definitive election count because his candidate lost, in the same way that the Confederacy said we're leaving because Abraham Lincoln won. They left after Lincoln won before he became president. That was how they overthrew those results. And the South in the 1960s and late 50s overthrew the rulings of the Supreme Court and the actions of the Congress by refusing to adopt them and then finding any means possible to get around them, which is what they've been doing with the Voting Rights Act ever since. Brooks's words seem detached from the gravitational pull of logic itself, but they rest on an epistemology built of long repeated ideas. And epistemology is this big academic word that means, how do we know what we know? How do we think we know what we know? And he's saying that the epistemology is built on long repeated ideas. Alabama's story of freedom is in no small part the nation's story of freedom. When white people stormed across Creek Indian lands in the 1830s, when white citizens shot black voters during Reconstruction, when white workers and employers railed against the Fair Employment Practices Committee in the 1940s, When Wallace framed his political career in opposition to federal power, when white local politicians tried to subvert the Federal Voting Rights Act, all were part of an American tradition that now includes the ransacking of the US Capitol. The through line is there. In April, just a tweet that captured it, Trump was just asked, do you think a doctor should be punished who performs abortions? Do you think a doctor should be punished who performs abortions? And Trump's answer, I'd let that be to the states, you know. Everything we're doing now is states and states' rights. His argument about sending it back to the states is straight out of the states' rights playbook against the federal tyranny, the federal government. And Elie Mystal, who's an incredible kind of wise pundit, put it this way yesterday. I sometimes find it helpful to remember that having one political party directly appeal to uneducated whites with explicitly racist and native language is a near constant feature in American politics. We're not fighting a new battle. We're fighting an extremely old one. And I'm determined that we're going to win this one. We have to win this one. In the 1870s and 1880s, the ability and willingness of the American Northern white establishment to step away from the brutality of racism in the American South and to abandon African American men in the American South and Asian American men in the American West who had gained the right to vote. The willingness to walk away and to abandon them, the federal government's willingness to do that, set us on a course that meant that we didn't really begin to achieve American democracy until really the 1960s. And ever since we've achieved it in 1960s, it's been under attack ever since. And when Barack Obama scaled the mountaintop in 2008, it was time again for the response of what Dr. Carol Anderson calls white rage. The response of Wallace, the response of MAGA, the response of Trump. We are fortunate to live now, to be able to play a role, a central casting role in this struggle. That's where common power comes in. If we could design an organization years ago that was going to have the approach, the methodology, the belief, the commitments, and the supporters to be cast for this moment, this would be it. We have to give it everything we have, and I know you are. Time and treasure, beyond comfort zones. We have to. And then when the election occurs, whatever the result, we have to stay ready and engaged. This is the battle of a lifetime. In John Lewis's words, the commitment to a multiracial democracy is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, a season, a political campaign, a presidency. It is the struggle of a lifetime. We have a new lost cause, and it's defined American politics for the last several years. We have a chance to stop it in its tracks right now, to stand against it, to reject it, and to definitively turn the page. Doesn't mean that the ideas will go away, but we have the ability to stand up for it in a way that the United States did not do when the first lost cause was created. They did when the Confederacy seceded, but begrudgingly. and didn't turn it into a moral argument until 1862 with the Emancipation Proclamation. It's our time and it's our moment. And if we don't do our part, in the words of a guy who spends time with us on our learning tours, Georgia poet Hank Stewart, if we don't do our part, it's our fault. So I know that you all signed up for this lecture, and I know you're all on board. And I thank you. I thank you. We have a month to go. Election voting occurring all over the country already. A month until the election is over. May we be as true to our convictions as those who fought for civil rights and voting rights for decades and for generations. May we all. Thank you so much. I'll take a drink of some water here and I'll come back and see what questions there are. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight or for watching this on your own timing. Let me see what questions we've got here. Okay, good question by Barbara. Okay. I see your question, and let me see over here in the Q&A too. Okay, let me start with your question, Carol, about what has now been called sane washing. S-A-N-E, sane, as in not insane, but sane. Sane washing, where the news media report on Trump's public messaging in a way that makes him sound okay, in a way that makes him sound reasonable. What's my thoughts about this? And why are the mass media doing this? And would he be as popular if the media weren't doing this? I believe that at this point in time, the sane washing of Donald Trump really does not matter much right now. I do not think that the people that are core supporters of Donald Trump are in any way, shape, or form reading his speeches or paying attention to them in any way that it suggests a certain kind of rational assessment. So the sane washing to me is bad, not because of what I think is actually an effect upon the public, but it's bad because journalists abdicate their responsibility here, that they need to be as vigilant as a Edward R. Murrow was with Joseph McCarthy in the 1950s. They need to be as thoughtful as possible in their analysis to help us who are trying to respond against Trump to be able to see and read and hear everything that's being said. But I don't think that the sane washing actually benefits, hurts Trump in any significant way, because the people that were with him are going to stay with him. They've been hearing this garbage for him for some time. And yes, it's worse now, his ability to hold together coherent thoughts and the craziness of what he says. Today, he went off, as he always does, on wind power. I mean, it's clearly that he's lost things. I think that at this point in time, that sane washing is driven mostly because people who cover Trump have heard it over and over and over again. And it is just a truism that when you're a campaign journalist, that when you hear the same things over and over and over again, you don't report that kind of stuff. You report only the unusual, the new. So when he talks about Harris being dumb, or she's not black, or these kinds of things. These were new pieces he added, so that gets covered. But the constancy of his rambling, incoherent stories is not considered news by most journalists, and so they just don't report it. They just don't. And I don't think that it would make a difference to his supporters if they did. And would it turn a few more people against him? Maybe, but at the margins. At the margins. I think far more important right now is the campaign that Harris, Walz, and the Democrats are running, where they are being aggressive about their own truths and their own stories, and they're demanding and forcing another narrative. This is what Biden did not do effectively post 2022. In 2022, he helped to set the course for a narrative, and this helped the Democrats to do better than expected in that election. But he was not able to drive the narrative in 2024. Harris has been able to take the narrative back about the promise of America and about a new way forward and about truth telling and about empathy. And so to me, that is more important than getting rid of sane washing by the news media. I wish they wouldn't do it, because it's a poor performance and activity by journalists, and I really think that they've lost the ability to serve us well as a country. I'm not going to quit on them, because I believe in the free press, but currently our news media have lost the ability to serve us for our democratic ideals. I definitely believe that. And the New York Times is like right at the forefront of this. They have lost the ability to serve our democracy in ways that they should. Do you know that, as an example of this, and I used to talk about this in class, in 1991, David Duke ran for the governorship of Louisiana. And David Duke, former member of the Klan, had whitewashed his rhetoric to adopt the kind of George Wallace approach. And Duke was never able to effectively outrun his history and his current engagement with the Klan. But part of the reason he was never able to do that is that in 1991, when he ran for governor, the New Orleans Times-Picayune newspaper, kind of an unusual name, I know, the Times-Picayune, but the New Orleans Times-Picayune newspaper made a leadership decision. Then the decision they made is that they would cover Duke's candidacy like it was the equivalent of a hurricane bearing down on Louisiana, and that they would cover it with the same kind of alarm and declarations of truth and appropriate actions and the damage that it would cause, as a service, as a public service to what they considered democracy and Louisianans. So they covered that campaign with the mindset that Duke was the equivalent of a hurricane. Now, I've been watching the hurricane coverage on TV right now, or seeing snippets of it. And the coverage is all by respectable news organizations. The coverage is all about, here's the things you need to do. You need to get out of the way. Or if you haven't left, here's how you shelter in place. Here's where you find water. Here's what you need to do. And we've been covering the onrushingness, and there's been sirens and governors and even DeSantis saying, get out of here, get out of here, get out of here. That's how you cover a hurricane. You talk about the damage, the truth. You tell us the truth about the facts. You don't say it's going to be no big deal. You say it's going to be a big effing deal. Here's the situation. That's how the news media should be covering Trump. I believe it in my core. I think they should be doing that. But they aren't capable of doing it. And Trump has leveraged that for his own political purposes, just as George Wallace leveraged it. I think the American system of democracy needs a reconsideration of how the press functions. But I'm not in any way, shape, or form interested in trying to limit the press. Okay, then the other question here is, where does Project 2025 fit? Where is Project 2025? Project 2025 is the blueprint, of course, of where Trump wants to take us, where white Christian nationalism wants to take us, where MAGA Nation wants to take us. And they have their leader. It's not actually Trump. It's J.D. Vance. All right. They look forward to the next person, the handing of the baton. Vance has been chosen essentially to take us into the Project 2025 world. And I think Project 2025 is an outlining of all the diabolical grievance politics, lost cause arguments that Trump et al. Will take us into. And I firmly believe that if Trump's elected, that they will move us that way, and it will happen immediately. And I do not have confidence that we will have fair and free elections again. I do not. Carol, you mentioned that I was going to say George Wallace, that Donald Trump is going to do a rally in New York City in late October. I did, of course. You invoked the Nazi rally in 1934. That was in Madison Square Garden. That's you showed. The rally that I was going to invoke is the George Wallace rally in New York City in October. I think it was October 24th of 1968, late in that campaign. I swear it's straight out of the Wallace book. And it's about national attention and doing it in the heart of, again, New York City. Just like Henry Grady in 1886 went to New York City to declare that the South has nothing to take back. It is a statement about the power of the lost cause and their commitment to revolution. That's what it is. Let's see. Barbara asked, since Trump's MAGA control, since the MAGA nation controls such a solid Christian archetype myth, do I feel the Democrats need an archetype myth, like a hero, a Shiro journey, or something that deeply resonates with the culture? And then Jen asks about, what about the future of disinformation that supports the lies of MAGA? These two points are related, actually. I think that the commitment of Common Power with the creation of the Institute for Common Power in 2022 was a decision that Charles and I and Terry Scott had, that education as a neutral arbiter of knowledge and truth is a losing proposition in a world in which there is such a strong narrative of a certain cause, and that narrative is upheld by countless forms of mis and disinformation. That to think that our educational system can somehow withstand this and effectively guide us through it is to make the same mistake we think about the news media. They cannot do it. They just cannot. They are not designed to do it. Our traditional schools and universities are just as poorly equipped to handle this moment as the news media are. And so because of that, we created the Institute for Common Power to develop and to instill and to be a force in our civic space for what we called a narrative of truth and democracy. And that's what we're living into every single day in our commitment. And we're just 2 years into that body of work, but we fundamentally believe that an institute, that's why we called it the Institute, that an educational arm needs to be constructed that is not a university, that is not a school, but has a deep commitment to education, brings the expertise that some people with PhDs and other incredible teachers bring, and says, we are going to be educators for democracy. That prompts us to construct a narrative or narratives that are truthful, that are what we'll call, have a fidelity to the truth that we cannot expect out of news media or educational institutions today, because they just bow. They're overwhelmed by the civic pressure. I'll finish kind of like my thoughts here, and I'll finish with this stuff. Because I feel so strongly about it. The disinformation that is rampant and omnipresent in American life that Trump et al. Fuel and build upon, but is sustained by a much larger universe of global people, some seeking to damage the United States, others seeking for economic purposes, and others because they're true believers in the MAGA world, is so powerful. It is like a hurricane. It is a Category 5 hurricane. And we can duck and cover, or we can build our institutions stronger, and we can build our systems more effectively. And I genuinely think that we need the Institute for Common Power and other like-minded, not formalized institutions, but ones that are born out of a political space that is committed to a democracy as we understand it to be the ideals of this country, and to live it out on a daily basis, and to invest in it, and to get others to the cause in the same way that the NAACP and Charles Hamilton Houston in the 1940s built an army of lawyers to overturn Roe v. Wade. And they got it, I'm sorry, not Roe v. Wade, to overturn Plessy v. Ferguson. And they got it done. They got it done. And they spurred along the civil rights movement. And we had a revolution we've never seen in this country. But we didn't sustain it. And when I talk to the civil rights leaders, and one in particular who's a mentor to us at Common Power, Dr. Bernard Lafayette, he says that the mistake they made is they did not institutionalize in education arenas the truths that they fought for. They did not. And so today, that would be the goal, but I don't think our traditional education institutions are capable of doing it. Although friends of mine who are in academic spaces say, don't give up on us. Don't quit. Yes, David, you chose this decision and this approach, and you all are doing it this way, but don't quit on us. And I think that's a fair statement. They deserve all of our credit. So to me, the fight against misinformation and disinformation is not about per se an archetype of a hero or a heroine that counters the kind of Christian mythic ideal. It is about a building up of an army, of a constellation of superheroes. We'll call them the Avengers, okay? That will work together. And this is why these stories matter to us at such a deep level, is that the assembling of those Avengers is the only way forward. It's the only way forward. And it happened in a Nashville and in Atlanta and a Birmingham and a Montgomery and a Selma and in a Mississippi. And we can do it now. In fact, there's a lot of evidence that we are doing it right now. And there's a lot of evidence that that person right there, Kamala Harris, is built for this moment, that she is farther along in her articulation and understanding of the way that her presidency will transform America than Barack Obama's ever did. In my view, Obama was incredible. It was the greatest political civic moment of my lifetime to get the man elected in 2008. And I do not think that he was as big of a threat to the system as Kamala Harris is. And so today the battle is even more pitched. And the January 2021 battle is, I think, going to be exponentially larger post this election. And if we don't have all of our Avengers assembled and our energy in place and our people willing to do the work, and that means us, then the same thing that happened in the 1860s and 1870s and 1880s is going to happen again. And I'm not going to live with that. I'm not. And I don't think you all are. And that's why we're giving it everything we've got right now. And we will wake up on November 6th. I looked over at the calendar on November 6th, and we will keep it going. All right. That is the baton that's been passed with us. All right. And I accept. From the Confederacy through Wallace to Trump. This is our moment. All right. Good night. Thank you, everybody. Let's go.